Welcome to Impact Pasadena. It's my pleasure and great honor to welcome Congresswoman Judy Chu from the 27th Congressional District. She's here from her busy life in Washington for a week to meet and greet everybody and kind of fill us in on everything that's been going on in Washington, which is a lot. Before I get into your wonderful work and how you got into Congress and how you've been doing, I want to get an update because it's so much in the news today about the impeachment and what's been going on in Washington. I know you've been heavily involved in all that and keeping tabs on it for us, but could you give us a little update here? I know it'll change in 3 hours or 3 days, but maybe you can give us the latest.
Well, we believe that it's our grave responsibility to uphold the Constitution. And unfortunately, this is a president who has been engaged in an abuse of power, which came to be known through that whistleblower, who then was able to document the fact that when the president of Ukraine asked for a very needed $400 million to protect themselves from Russia, the president uttered, I do want you to do us a favor, though. And
just to interrupt, this was money that had been appropriated by the United States Congress for Ukraine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so there had to be extra special means to hold that money. And in fact, people were wondering why, our appropriators were wondering why that money was being held up.
Right.
But as it turned out, there was this whole shadow government led by Rudy Giuliani that operated outside of our officials, our State Department officials. Mm-hmm. And so there appears to be a quid pro quo that has been going on. That's what started the impeachment inquiry. There has been an investigation, and now this process is ready to go open. We had a vote this last Thursday, and it set the rules for these open hearings. So now the public will be able to see what's going on. In fact, we've already gotten a glimpse of it through the transcripts. So it will proceed to a vote, possibly before the end of the year. Once the House votes on it, then it goes to the Senate. The Senate then acts like a jury, with the House of Representatives as the prosecutors and the president having his own defense attorneys. Then the Senate votes on it.
Yeah, so I mean, just to clarify for folks, we're in the stage of an inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
So we're investigating to see, the Congress is, and at a certain point, the Judiciary Committee, I suppose, will draw up articles of impeachment if it gets to that stage, mm-hmm. and the Congress will then vote on those articles, and then the Congress will be the prosecutors in a sense, mm-hmm. and the jury will be the Senate.
That's right.
What does the timing look like from what you see on this?
I sense that we are moving fairly quickly so as to have a vote before the end of the year. But what does that mean for the Senate? Would the Senate be able to vote before the end of the year? I'm not sure. What I do know is that people do not want to get this mixed up with 2020. So much will happen in 2020, and it is not good to let this go on that far. Yeah. Nonetheless, could all this be done before then? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Stay tuned
mm-hmm.
to the cable stations. So let's go back a little bit, because I know you're a native Angelino. Mm-hmm. You were born and raised in LA. And you went to UCLA, where you got your BA, mm-hmm. and then you have a PhD in psychology, right. I believe.
Yeah.
So you spent quite a while as a professor mm-hmm. In the community college system. So this is near and dear to my heart, because I'm on the board of PCC, mm-hmm. and we think of community colleges today as really the future of our education system. So tell me a little bit about your experience as a professor there, and what you enjoyed about it, or what you found interesting about the students.
I spent 20 years teaching in the psychology department, first at Los Angeles City College and then at East Los Angeles College. And it was just such an education into the hopes and dreams of so many people who come into college despite the odds. I mean, so many of them have had such tough lives as refugees, as immigrants, as the first persons in their family to go to college. And so they were just really trying to make something of themselves, to get a college education so that they can achieve the American dream. Now, I had a special ability to look into their lives, and the reason is I always required them as their psychology professor to do an autobiography. So I got to learn so much about their lives, and I really came to know that the community college is such an important bridge to people who want to get that college degree. It's the first step towards higher education, and higher education is really the key to the middle class.
Yeah, I mean, what we say in the community colleges now is that the AA degree, the associate's degree, is really the new high school degree in a sense in terms of employment. And I find, as you did, that these students are ambitious, hardworking, dedicated, very devoted to family, often first generation. So it's inspiring. And so I commend you for your hard work in the community college system before you went into public life. So speaking of public life, you started out on the school board, which is sort of the way a lot of folks get into the public service, but then very quickly you were on the city council, you were a mayor, you were in the state assembly, and then elected to the House in, I believe, 2009 in a special election. So what was that journey like? I mean, that transformation from being an educator into being a person in public service?
Well, I started, of course, on the school board, but I really realized that I had to get involved when there was this ugly English-only movement in the city of Monterey Park. There were many immigrants that were moving in, and then there was a reaction against them. So some of the longtime residents wanted only English books in the library and only English on the signs in the city. But the last straw was when they wanted English only on the signs in the city. So I joined a multi-ethnic group of people to fight it. We got thousands of signatures on petitions, and we were successful in overturning it. But then it became so apparent to me that the city council did not reflect the makeup of the city. And so I ran for city council to be a bridge between people, to be a bridge to having people understand one another and to understand about diversity. So I devoted 13 years of my life to that, and I really learned that being in elected office is very, very important, and that you could actually really change lives that way. So that's what led me to want to actually get on the state assembly and into the state legislature so that I could pass bills that could affect people's lives. And then it was on to Congress.
Well, let me go back because you really are a pioneer in that sense. In this, what we see now in the anti-immigrant movement, we see it broadly nationally. But I recall this. You're reminding me about this struggle in Monterey Park, and you put it very well. It's a matter of really education, bridging the gap for people. But that was so important, and some of the nativism that comes out in these kind of local struggles, which we see all around the country now. I wonder if you have any insights in a national perspective on anti-immigrant feeling and how we can repair some of that.
It is so important for the people that are at the top to send a message of an appreciation of its people. And unfortunately, that is not happening right now. I think actually that is why the divisions and feelings of hatred and hate crimes are being exacerbated. But the person at the top could play such a huge role in healing and in sending a message that we do need to get along. So I hope that we can return to that point because America has been a beacon, and it has provided so much opportunities to so many people of different ethnic backgrounds. We have had refugees come and rebuild their lives here, but we are in a situation now where the number of refugees that are being admitted are at the lowest ever in history. Yeah. The cap has been taken down to 18,000, which is the lowest ever, and yet you have so much need in the world, such as Syrian refugees, and how about the Kurdish?
Well, as a practical matter too, we need to grow our productive workers and worker base, and there are a lot of people baby boomers getting older, and not so many young people. And immigrants start businesses, they produce, they pay taxes. I mean, it's not complicated, but to do that. Well, no, along those lines, and I may have mentioned it at the opening, but I want to underline the fact that you were the first Chinese American woman elected to Congress, which is a real hallmark, and it's something that is in line with the kind of work that you did locally, in a sense, isn't it? What does it feel like to be a first? I don't think I've ever met or interviewed a first person, and you are.
Well, it's an honor, but in reality, it's surprising that it took this long.
Yeah.
Because the Chinese have been in this country since the 1850s. So we've been around for 170 years. So it really took a long time for Chinese Americans to become empowered, to get involved in the political system. And now, finally, we are able to be present in our federal government. In fact, I am chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. We've been trying to encourage others to run for Congress, and now we have 20 members of Congress that are Asian Pacific Islander. Many of them are firsts, too.
Well, we have a first Chinese American presidential candidate too, Andrew Yang. I don't know if I get very far, but he has wonderfully interesting ideas.
Oh my goodness!
I love, that's what I love about the Democratic Party is that you've got all these ideas, a lot of discussion. I don't hear Republicans talking about. I'm giving away a little bit of my partisanship here, but everybody knows. Well, one thing people don't know about, I'm sure from history, is something terrible period, which was the Chinese Exclusion Act. And I know you were instrumental in at least addressing that in our nation's history. Could you talk a little bit about that?
So I believe that the reason it did take so long for the first Chinese American woman to be elected to Congress in 2009 because of the Chinese Exclusion Act. For such a long time, Chinese Americans were disenfranchised. In 1882, this law was passed, and it was one of the most discriminatory acts in history because it said that Chinese Americans could not become naturalized citizens. Basically, it was so that they could not vote. And it also just eliminated them from being able to immigrate and named it by ethnicity. So it was the only ethnic group that was actually named for exclusion. And Chinese Americans had to carry papers on them at all times, proving that they were legal. If they didn't have it, then they would be deported, even if they were actually legal residents in this country. And the only way they could contest such a thing in court would be for a white person to testify for them. A Chinese person's testimony was not considered valid. So.
And this is after the Chinese had already made a great contribution to the country in every way, but including building the transcontinental railway and a lot of great contributions. So actually your bill was, explain that a little bit,
When I got elected, a group of national Chinese American organizations said this was the most discriminatory law in American history. It lasted for 60 long years in this country, and yet there's never been an apology by this government. Will you lead the effort? And so I did, and in 2012, we did indeed get the expression of regret for the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, and it was a unanimous vote in both the House and in the Senate.
And I think these things are important. People say it's just an apology or just a gesture, but in terms of every group in our country, it's a recognition and a kind of respect that is absolutely owed, I believe. So thank you for that.
Well, at that time, it was only the fourth such apology in history, behind the Japanese internment camps, the overthrow of the Hawaii monarchy, and slavery. Yeah.
Well, talking about immigration, let's catch up today to 2019 and talk about the pressing issues that we have. Top of my list, I know yours is our dreamers, who are many untalented, often very talented, accomplished, productive, undocumented young people. And it looked like we were this close. Yep. So where are we now?
Oh, this one is heartbreaking because these are young people who were brought here through no fault of their own, many of them as infants or young children. Many of them didn't even know they were not documented. But when they applied for college, suddenly found out that they were undocumented, and then could not access the things that everybody else could. Right. They could go to college, but they could not get a job because they were not legal, so they had to have all kinds of underground type jobs that didn't pay very well at all. Yeah. And then came DACA, President Obama's deferred action program, which allowed them to work and to be legal. Well, President Trump undid that, so now we are in a twilight zone period, where they are here, but there are no actions against them, and we are trying our best to make sure they don't get deported back to a country they don't even know. So we did pass a bill to have a path to legalization, and it is for them as well as for the temporary protected status holders. Those are people like those from El Salvador who came here due to the political turmoil and the natural disasters. So that bill has passed out of the House, and we're so proud of that, but there has to be action in the Senate.
And then we don't know what the White House will do. We don't know what Trump will do about it. So just in terms of for our dreamers, they're in limbo now. I mean, in what kind of jeopardy are they in at this point? I'm not quite clear about that. I'm sure our audience doesn't really know either.
They could be deported at any time, but so far the president hasn't taken those kind of actions against them.
But it's up to him, in a sense.
Yeah,
still.
That's right.
Yeah. Tough. Exploitation of undocumented workers, folks who are working hard to support their families but do not have documentation. And one of the things that people may not realize is that the boss can exploit them because they can always say, well, we'll turn you in, we'll deport you back to your country. And so it's this whole, as we witness, it's this whole underground exploited class of workers. And I know you've addressed this in your work. Can you talk about it a little bit?
Well, this is called the Power Act, and it would allow an undocumented person who sees labor violations and wants to report them, whistleblower type safety. And so it would allow them to be able to report it, but then have a special status, a U visa status, which would allow them to stay in the country and be able to work as this process is going through.
Where are we with the E-Verify and the employer status? Because a lot of it does rest on employers to some degree. You don't hear much about that. Where is it an enforcement issue really with the E-Verify?
They are supposed to be verifying. All employers are supposed to be verifying their employees. E-Verify is not being used on a very widespread basis. It could be. When we had a comprehensive immigration bill that was going through the process in 2013, it included paths to citizenship, it included legalization or a path to legalization for Dreamers and all kinds of things, and reducing the visa backlogs. It also included E-Verify.
Yeah.
But we think that if there's going to be E-Verify, there should be kind of everything in a package deal.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is the quagmire of the immigration issue and of the culture wars. You know, that this is that because you know, I've heard lots of Republicans and even Trump at certain points support protecting the Dreamers because, after all, as you said, no fault of their own, and there's every reason for these young people to be. But yet, because of the culture wars and the way that this has sort of paralyzed the political system. We can't even agree on what we agree on. We can't even move forward on what we agree on.
Well, President Trump has gone back and forth.
Yeah,
I mean, you know he changes his mind a lot.
Yeah.
He did say positive things about the Dreamers at one point, but now he's walked it back.
Well, let's talk about another very important issue, which is civil rights, women's rights, pro-choice. I know you're very involved and supporting Planned Parenthood. Talk about the importance of that. This is another one that, of course, gets caught up in the culture wars. But again, it's something that I think most Americans agree that a woman's right to choose is valuable and legal. So, but yet.
Well, the vast majority of Americans believes that a woman should have a right to choose and that her decisions should be between her and her physician. But yes, we do have these culture wars, and ever since Brett Kavanaugh was named a Supreme Court Justice on the U.S. Supreme Court, there have been these movements in certain states to take away a woman's right to choose. Some of the most extreme ones are in Alabama, where for all intents and purposes, outlaws abortion, and then if a doctor is found to perform it, the doctor has to be in prison for 99 years. So when those happened, many women got very upset and anxious, and that's why I reintroduced my Women's Health Protection Act. If the U.S. Supreme Court struck down Roe versus Wade, this act would reinstate the right to choose in every state, so that right would then be protected.
And it looks like the new court calendar is going to include some challenges to Roe.
Yes.
And you know, what burns me is that there's a kind of a guerrilla warfare going on the pro-life side, because they do all these little restrictions where they don't attack frontally the law, but they say you have to close, you know, every clinic has to go through a million hoops to, you know, very sneaky stuff, I think. But
that's why we put forth the Women's Health Protection Act, because you're absolutely right. They just imposed more and more restrictions, such as the width of a clinic door, or of the room, or saying that a doctor has to have admitting privileges in a nearby hospital, even though that has nothing to do with what the doctor is doing in that clinic. So we were playing whack-a-mole with all these different kinds of laws. That's why we decided to introduce this Women's Health Protection Act. Yeah,
well, it's so important. You know, one of the other important areas that you've been working on, I know, is on Veterans Affairs. And we have now a veterans clinic.
Yes, I'm so proud of it, because
I know you fought hard for this, Congresswoman.
It was a long road. When I got Pasadena in my district, I found to my shock that there was no healthcare clinic here, even though this whole area of the San Gabriel Valley is home to 45,000 veterans.
Yes.
And the fact that we don't have a healthcare clinic means that veterans have to travel such long distances, many times just spending their whole day traveling.
Right.
So I have been on this multi-year effort. Now it's been 7 years, just getting the VA to place this clinic here. And finally, just a few months ago, we did get the Veterans Healthcare Clinic here. It is in Arcadia on Foothill and Santa Anita. It's really wonderful freeway access and bus access. And it's a beautiful clinic that has everything from primary care to telehealth to lab services to mental health services. And the great news is the VA is determined to have an even larger clinic in 3 to 5 years, a permanent clinic that will have even more services. In fact, they're putting all the wheels in place to get this thing going. So we will have even more to look forward to.
Yeah, I know at PCC we have a really terrific Veterans Center,
Yes.
but you know it's just a real challenge because the kind of support services that veterans need, in addition to the medical and, you know, you mentioned mental health. What are some examples of that? I know transportation, we have homeless veterans. I mean, what are some of the issues and what are some the communities or the government doing about some of that for our veterans, in addition to the health clinics?
Well, there are so many issues, and homelessness is one of the worst ones because there should not be veterans that are homeless out there. So now our housing programs make veterans a priority in terms of getting them housed, making sure that there are outreach efforts to them, and making sure that there is a whole person kind of concept where all their needs are met all at one time, so they don't have to go from place to place trying to know where those
and
resources
having counselors who can help them direct them to the services that they need. And,
exactly.
Now the Trump administration, the VA, I know has been through some changes. How is it dealing with these folks at the VA? Are they, below the political level, but just in terms of helping our veterans, how's it been?
Well, I think the rank and file really want to do their job for the veterans. But what I'm concerned about is this effort at the top to privatize veteran services. I mean, our Veterans Administration hospitals and clinics are there for a reason. All those centers are there for a reason, but especially our health services, and we don't want to lose those.
Well, I want to continue this conversation if we may. I really appreciate we've got a lot more to talk about if you'll join us for the next segment. And I thank you, Congresswoman Judy Chu. Thanks so much for being my guest today.
Thank you.
So we'll wait.